Hey everybody, it's Chris with Overclockersclub. I've got something really cool here from MSI. Late last year, which was 2020, MSI decided to jump into the world of power supplies. So this is their first step at dipping their toes in the water. So we'll see how many other series come out. But looking at the feature set real quick here, I'll just sort of glance over it. It supports the latest NVIDIA GeForce RTX 30 series GPUs, which is good. Fully modular cable design, the flat cables I really like. 10-year warranty, 80 plus gold, which means it's around 90% efficient. And the rest of the stuff there, industrial level protection, LLC half bridge topology with DC to DC module design. There, I got the plastic off. It was so shiny that you couldn't see what this thing was. Okay, so it's the MPG A750GF. Looks like a GF. Okay, 750 watts. So, if you didn't know that MSI made power supplies, well, guess what? There you go. It's an 80 plus gold. Let's take a better look at the box. So the front of the box here, really all it says, full module cable design. I think that means fully modular. 80 plus gold certified for high efficiency and 100% all Japanese. 105 degrees Celsius. Capacitors. Says the same thing here on this side, just many different languages. So really, the real information is here on the back of the box. So this shows you your maximum wattage right here. You got 35 amps on your 12 volt rails. That's the main thing. And 750 watts, your cables. These are all flat cables, so they're not the usual cables that have the nylon braiding around them. And yeah, it depends if you like those or not. I like the flat cables. Here are your basic dimensions, 160 by 150. 86 millimeters is pretty standard on the height. And then again, you can see this is fully modular on the back, although that image is a little dark. We'll see when we get everything out of the box here in a moment. And this little graph right here, let me zoom in a little better on that. Most power supplies are rated. They're rated at 50% load. So what that means is when you size a power supply, you might think bigger is better. So you might think, wow, if a 750 watt is good, why not use a 1000 watt? Well, that just means that you're not going to be really loading your system all the way, so you won't be operating where it's most efficient. Although if you look at this chart, or this little graph, I should say, it's a little hard to tell exactly what the efficiency is here, but the curve doesn't change much from where it's loaded 10% up to 100%. But anyway, typically 50% is where you want to size your power supply. There are a lot of online calculators where you put in all of your components and your motherboard and your processor, and it will sort of show you how many watts that you'll be using and helps you determine the size of the power supply you should use for your system. All right, so looking inside the box, it looks like we've got power supply units. So this is multiple languages here. Safety instructions. So that's what that is. And this is your user manual. You can see here, I forgot to mention earlier, there are 3 flavors of this power supply. So you've got a 650, 750, and an 850 watt capability. And here we are again looking at, so this sort of shows you, depending upon which power supply, so you get an idea of which one has which connectors, because they don't always come the same. Usually the higher the wattage on the power supply, you'll get more connectors. And then your specifications here for each power supply, and then this shows you what connectors to use for your various graphics cards. So again, 150 to 200 watts, 200 to 300, and pretty much 300 to 350 and up. Shows you which connectors, dimensional information, and nothing on the back. All right, let me Get my camera positioned a little better here. And there's your power cord. Usually these pouches have all of your cables in them. And here is the unit. And that looks pretty nice. So the fan has a nice honeycomb type of mesh grid there for ventilation. Pretty much the whole back except this little area here. That's the only part that's not ventilated, but the rest of it is ventilated. And on the sides you just have your logo, MPG A750GF. Oh, here we go. So your information, in case you don't have the box handy, is right there on the power supply, which most of them put that sticker on there with the basic information anyway on it. So now we'll look at the cables. And like I said earlier, these are all flat cables, so they give you a nice little pouch to store your cables. Usually you don't use all of these, so it's nice to have a little pouch there to store your cables in. And they actually give you some mounting screws to attach your power supply to your case. And oh, that is actually sealed up. Alright, so get that cut open. And let's see, usually your main cable, there you go. So this is your main 24-pin ATX cable. Again, flat cable, everything here is flat. And all the wiring is black, so we don't have any odd colors. So let's see, we've got, here's one of the PCIe cables. And actually, let me just sort these out. Alright, so I got the cables sorted out here. So this is your cable that has your 4 Molex connectors. And like I said, not too many people really need these anymore. It is nice to have, though, if you do need it. I shouldn't make fun of it. And then there's one floppy drive connector. Again, I'd be surprised if too many people use those anymore. Let's see, these two are your CPU power cables. You may or may not need both of these, depending upon your motherboard and CPU, but this is what gets the power to your CPU. These are your PCIe cables. And let's see, I've got 2 of them that have 2 connectors on the ends that are the 6+2. So there are 2 of the 6+2 on that one. Let's see, 2 of the 6+2 on that one. And then these are just 6+2, 1 each. So it's just simply one connector that goes to a 6+2. 2 of those. These are your SATA cables. So each one has 4 SATA connectors there for SATA power to like a hard drive, for example. So there are 4 on this cable, 4 on that one, 4. A total of 8, and I think that covers everything. All right. All right, so now I will get this connected and powered up to my test system there. I'm using a 9900K CPU. I'll crank the overclock up to 4.9 gigahertz, and I'll get a couple of graphics cards on there, and again stress those to sort of put the maximum load on here I can. And then we'll look at some of the thermals. I've got an infrared camera. We'll see what that looks like. And this one looks pretty easy to pop the top off so we can get a better look inside. Of course, I don't recommend you doing that because it is dangerous and you'll of course void your warranty. So I will do it so you don't have to. So now I'll get this thing assembled and installed and all plugged in. So one thing that people do a lot of times is, you get sort of focused on a CPU or a motherboard with all kinds of fancy gaming features, and you spend all your money on that, and a lot of times it's overkill. You'll get a motherboard with all kinds of fancy gaming features that you'll never really end up using, you don't really need. And what happens is the power supply sort of becomes an afterthought, and you really shouldn't skimp on your power supply. Now, even though this is fully modular, as you can see, it always kind of surprised me a little, because you're going to need this cable no matter what. You're going to need to power your motherboard. So having this modular, I don't know if it really matters. I guess during an installation, a tight installation in a case, maybe, but usually after you get your power supply in the case, you can't really get to this face right here to get stuff plugged in, so you kind of need to get stuff plugged in ahead of time anyway. So not that any of that really matters, but it is a good idea to sort of look at your system and determine which connectors you need ahead of time, so you can have this stuff all plugged in and ready to go. So let's see, this is SATA, so we will go ahead, and these are all labeled here on the side. If I can get this flipped around. So it tells you what each socket is for. So that sort of helps, because I've seen some of the older power supplies years ago, they didn't have any marking. But usually these things are pretty easy to get everything connected. So that's my SATA connector for the hard drive and the RGB on my cooler. Here is a double PCIe for the graphics card. Actually, I'm going to be running 2 graphics cards, so I will need 2 of these connectors. I'll be using both of these double PCIe connectors. So we'll get these ready. Now this is an older GTX 770, and I've got 2 680s, older 680s, but they use a fair amount of power, so I don't know if I'll leave this one in there and put both 680s or just add a 680. Again, the goal here is to just stress the system. So there's one VGA, and here's the other one. I'll just let these hang off to the side for the moment. And let's see, I need the CPU power now. And this motherboard just has a single 8-pin connector to the motherboard, so I only need to use one of these. And that should be it. And these are labeled, so there's the CPU end. And then I'll fish these through and get each one plugged in. So next is the big 24 pin here. And I'm pretty sure this is not a 0 RPM fan. It doesn't say anything about it. But the systems that have the 0 RPM fan, they're made to run with the fan off until the system heats up. There's usually a little temperature sensor, a little thermistor in there, and when the temperature gets to a certain level, the fan will kick on. And we'll get, I think I'll just grab another 680 and we'll just leave the 770 in here. So there's one connector, and I don't remember what the 680 uses, but this one uses a 6 and an 8 together. And then next, is that in there? Yep. Next is power to the solid state drive, and then there's another connector for the RGB on this cooler, And that should be all of my connections. And then I'll slide this under a little bit. All right, so let me grab that other graphics card. And here's my 680. It's funny, when these first came out, these things were like $600. And it's just funny to see how, of course, right now, the current situation, I could probably get a lot of money out of this card. But, you know, these things, you could practically get them for $100 for a while there. All right, so he's going to hang over the edge just a little bit, but for the testing purposes, we're okay. And we use 2 6-pins on this one. And I'll actually leave this space the way it is. I've got my network card in the middle that leaves some airspace in there so that the 770 here at the back can get plenty of air. Okay. All right, so I think everything is ready to go. I need to plug this into the outlet and fire it up. All right, so we'll go ahead and turn the power on. Fans are spinning, and it may take it a moment to recognize this additional graphics card. No, I already got the splash screen. All right, so that was fast. So the goal here really is to pull as much power through the unit here as I can, so I decided to go ahead and add my second GTX 680. So I've got 2 GTX 680s and 1 770, and yeah, I know they're pretty old, but they still draw a lot of power. And then we'll overclock the CPU there to 4.9 gigahertz, and then use AIDA64 to put a load on all this stuff, and then look at the maximum wattage just to see what I can pull through it. And down here, and I know this isn't the most accurate way, but it looks like at idle we're running 85, 95 watts, somewhere around there. And then when I crank it up, we'll see what we pull. All right, so I've got everything cranked up. I turned the fans up on all 3 of these GPUs, and it sounds like a jet engine getting ready to take off. And let's see what we're using. So somewhere between 6.25, 6.5 up to 750. All right, so that's about as much as I can pull with the system as I have it set up. And the fan here looks to be turning pretty good. There's some warm air coming out here. I'll get the thermal camera out next and see what kind of temperatures are coming out of the exhaust there. Alright, so we've pretty much maxed out the system here as far as many watts as I can pull through it with what I've got. Looks like the intake side is around 32, 33. See, and the fan looks to be spinning at the maximum. Side of the power supply, and then looking at the exhaust side, of course, this is where things get pretty toasty. But that's to be expected. And then sort of looking at the graphics cards, that's where we have a lot of warmth. And then looking at the motherboard, we also have a fair amount of warmth there. Of course, again, with a full load, that's to be expected. All right, so I took the cover off. There's the top mesh panel for the fan. And there is the fan. Of course, I've got everything unplugged and powered off. This is something you would not ever really normally need to do yourself. There are some hazardous voltages in there, so that's why I'm doing this. So you don't have to. Anyway, there are all the capacitors, large one right there. Transistors, transformers, resistors, heat sinks, all that good stuff. A few integrated circuits in there. And basically your 120 volts comes in here. It gets dropped down through the various transformers, and the voltage gets dropped down to DC. This is the back plane over here where all of your stuff plugs in on the other side. But like I said, this isn't anything you would normally ever need to do. And in case anyone's wondering, here is the part number for the fan. All right, I'll get this all put back together. And here's a nice graphic that I found that sort of organizes the cable layout a little more in a little more detail. So you can look at each cable, look at the number of connectors and the length of each cable. And below, again, is the specification list for this particular power supply. And this is a 750 watt. There's an 850 watt and a 650 watt. This one's right in the middle. And you want to pay attention to the cable layout because it can vary based on the size of the power supply. Well, I got it all back together and it still works. Everything's running just fine. And it proved that I could put a pretty good load on it, and it worked quite well. No issues. Even the fan, when cranked all the way up, you couldn't hear it. Of course, with the fans on these graphics cards cranked all the way up, you couldn't hear that fan anyway. But of course, that same logical follow through when you've got this thing buried deep in your case. Pretty much everything else going on when you crank up the load, your other fans will spool up, and you're not going to hear the fan on this power supply. So overall, I really like this little power supply, and I just realized I forgot to pull the little protective plastic here off of the logo. There we go. All right, so pricing on this, again, we're around $100. The list price, I think, is like $129, but you can find this on Amazon for $99. Decent price for a power supply that's in the 750 watt range. Again, you've got the 80 plus gold and the 10-year warranty, and this is backed by a reputable company like MSI. They're not going anywhere, so you can rest assured that your warranty will be good. And another thing I didn't really mention earlier, I noticed when I plugged all of the cables into the power supply over here, they all went into the sockets smoothly. That tells me that the tooling they're using, the injection mold tooling for their connectors, whoever they source their cables from, and then the sockets here on the back, they're maintaining their tooling and keeping it in good condition. So with all that in mind, I would definitely give this the Overclockers Club Gold Award. This is Chris with Overclockers Club. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.